All right, we got something a little bit different for you today on the Morning Pit. As I've said, out of town this week. Wanted to get a few things recorded ahead of time, but didn't really think we could work ahead too much because we end up doing a whole episode about what player, and that player ends up going to the portal or something. Well, then it'll all be irrelevant and a moot point and not all that interesting to listen to. So I was trying to think of different things we could talk about, different things we could do to kind of get through this week while I'm gone, just to keep giving you some good video content here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And as you all have already seen by the headline, you know what this is. Our good friend Jerry DiPaola, formerly of the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, announced his retirement. He hung it up. The Blue Gold game was his final professional obligation after 53 years of covering Pittsburgh sports. And he's been all over the place. He covered the Steelers. He's worked high school. He's worked the copy desk, a lot of things. And the last 14 years he has spent covering your Pittsburgh Panthers. I think Jerry is he's a gentleman. He's a scholar. One of the friendliest guys you're going to meet in this town, and always great to talk to us. So I said, you know what? Let's hang out with Jerry for a little bit. Let's have him as a guest on the Morning Pit and talk to him about his time covering Pitt, his time in sports media, and a lot of stuff. I think there are a lot of interesting topics to talk to Jerry about. I tried to hit on as many as I could. Injury questions, his rapport with Pat Narduzzi. I think there were some interesting angles there as well. So here's our conversation with Jerry DiPaola, formerly of the Pittsburgh Tribune-Review, now a man who sits around and helps his wife with the gardening because that's what retirement is all about. Jerry DiPaola joins us here on the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And Jerry, I'm really excited to have you here. We started just to BS a little bit before we started recording, but that would have been all the good stuff. So we had to hit the record button and welcome in. We're talking to you early in the week, Jerry. It's really, I'll say it's Monday. We'll air this video later in the week, but today's Monday when we're recording this. This is your first business day of retirement, right? Like your first official day. What did it feel like when you woke up this morning and knew you wouldn't have to write about anything?
The first day of the rest of my life. It really feels good. And I wanted to ask you, Chris, that anybody go into the portal today from Pitt? Well, I don't care anymore.
That's it.
Hey, I wish them I wish Pat Narduzzi and Jeff Capel all the best, but I don't have to care that they're losing players or gaining players. But I understand they picked up a point guard from Oregon State today.
Yeah. They shortly before we started. What's that?
I was going to say special delivery from Scott Barnes, right?
Yeah, I guess so. That was the player to be named later on his transfer out there. I'm sure you'll still be on social media and things like that. Will you have to fight an instinct as you're scrolling through, like, oh, there's Pitt news, but I don't have to do anything about it? Or is it pretty easy? Has it been easy for you to just flip that switch?
Well, actually, I got home from the game Saturday night, and I actually stopped to visit my brother who was in from out of town. I didn't see the kid from South Alabama that committed. And I got home and my boss sent me a text and said, I'm going to post this South Alabama kid. I said, what's South Alabama kid? And I said, you want me to do it? And he said, no, I'm already doing it. So he took care of it and we posted it. And then now there's a kid from Oregon State that committed today, a point guard, I guess. That makes 4, right? That they got from the portal so far.
Yeah, those two plus the Iowa State. This is probably part of a bigger conversation, Jerry. But you've done this as long as you have. When you've done it as long as you did, you get to know the players. You get to know the teams. You get those kind of relations. Does it feel different now where you have these like 1-year rent-a-players? I was thinking of senior day last year for the football team. Like half those guys were only there for 1 year. Or this past year with hoops, Damian Dunn said, no, I don't even want to do senior day because I've already done, this would be my third. Does it feel different from a coverage perspective that these guys are coming in for 1 year? Who are they? Never really got to know them. And then they're gone before you even know.
I don't think, it is different. It struck me on Saturday when I find Kenny Pickett down on the field yesterday or before the game on Saturday, and I spoke to him. And first thing he said to me, "I hear you're retiring." If I ran into Kyle Lewis 3 years from now, he's not going to know anything about me. What I'm doing, even if I was still working. So it is different. I heard from a lot of former Pitt players. I heard from Andrew Taglianetti. He was one of my favorite guys, and a couple other guys. Jake Cradle was happy to see that the number 53 is in good hands now. Because I got the jersey with the 53 on it for 53 years in a business, and he was 53 for Pitt, So Yeah, it's different. It's different, but it doesn't bother me. I have enough good friends like yourself to keep me on my toes.
Sure. It's just funny. Like I was looking at, they have some of the transfer defensive ends they brought in, right? Blaine Spires, Joey Zielinski. These guys have 1 year of eligibility. Like they're going to be
Right.
here for 11 months, and it's just kind of here and gone. And, whereas you mentioned like Taglianetti, or if I run into guys like a Bill Stahl or Doran Dickerson, these guys who were around for 4 or 5
Right.
years.
Hmm.
Now, there's also something to be said too. I mean, you and I are talking about guys who were here in the Dave Wanstead era and the Paul Christ era, where we were around the team a lot more. We watched entire practices.
Right.
We crossed paths with them in the hallway, in the facility. I mean, there's something to be said over the last, I don't know, 10 years of creating more space between us and the team. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, yeah. There's always been more space between us and the team than there was when I was covering the Steelers.
Mm-hmm.
With the Steelers, you can go into the locker room every day, and you can build relationships that way. I built a good relationship back in the day with Jerome Bettis, Alan Faneca, until he shut me out because he didn't. You know that story, right?
No, what'd
The
you
Alan
do?
Faneca story. Well, Ben's rookie year, he gets Tommy Maddox gets hurt in Baltimore. And the next day, they brought up Alan Faneca to talk to us because on Mondays, the locker room was closed. They brought him to the media room. And I said to Faneca, I says, what's it going to feel like playing with a young, unproven rookie quarterback? And he got mad. He says, how do you think it's going to feel? We're playing against some rookie quarterback, And it caused a stir because it was like he was taking a shot at Ben, who was going to be the starter from then on. And I saw him in the locker room, I guess the next day or next week or something. He said, DiPaola, you set me up. I'm not talking to you anymore. And it was like at least 2 weeks that he didn't talk to me. But after that, it was my last year on the beat, I think. It was 20 for the 2004 season. So I really didn't care after that. And he went into the Hall of Fame, and good for him. So
He ended
whatever.
up doing okay. Yeah,
Yes.
it worked out for Alan Faneca. So that was your last year on the Steelers beat. So take us through the timeline. So 53 years ago would have been what, 1972?
1972. I
All right.
graduated from high school at Avalon High School, now Northgate, in 1972. Uh, Jim Haslett was not in my class. He was 2 years younger than me. You remember Jim Haslett, right?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I ran into his son at pro day. His son is a tight ends coach for the Saints.
Oh, jeez.
Um, so that was 72. I was there at a little weekly paper called The City and Suburban Life in Bellevue.
Oh,
Uh, and Tom McMillan, you remember Tom McMillan, the
sure.
Penguin executive and PG reporter? He was on my staff. I used to get kids from the high school. He's 2 years younger than me, to write stories, on the high school teams. And he was one of the kids from Bellevue High School that wrote stories for me. And
Wow.
then he went on. Now he's an author. He's been writing books on the Civil War and all kinds of different things. So
Sure.
um, and that was 76. Then I went to a little paper called the Butler County News in Zillionople.
Hmm.
We covered Seneca Valley and Mars, and that was a twice a week paper. So I'm gradually growing a little bit from once a week to twice a week. Then to the Valley News Dispatch in Tarentum for 6 years. In the Pittsburgh Press, 1986, just on the copy desk, sports copy desk. I
Hmm.
read. I used to edit a copy from Bob Herzl, now the West Virginia writer,
Hmm.
and Bob would always try to sneak a little things in through. Try maybe we weren't paying attention, and he would sneak some things through that maybe weren't exactly right. But Bob's a good man. I heard from him the other day. He's still working. God bless him. He's
Wow.
he's older than me, at least 10 years older than me, and he's still working covering West Virginia's athletics. Good guy, great baseball writer, one of the best baseball
Hmm.
writers ever, I thought. Um, that was the 86 to 92. Then the press closed. New Year's Eve, 1992, the press closed. We got our final checks on New Year's Eve, and a week later, I collected unemployment 1 week for being out of work, or 93. I had interviews all around. I had one in Pennsylvania, a paper in Pennsylvania. I remember the town it was in. It was near Philadelphia,
Hmm.
and one in Memphis. And Mike DeCourcy and I both we got an interview down there. And Mike took the job. I didn't because the Trib came by with an offer, and I was able to keep my family in town, which is what they
Sure.
wanted to do at the time. Yeah.
Nice.
Then that was 1993, January 14th, 1993, and 32 years ended this past Saturday.
And you, what did you do first at the Trib? What was your first assignment there?
It was copy desk work. It was
Oh,
copy
okay.
desk, but I did cover Penn State home games. Maybe in a road game or two that year. in the 1993 season. Yeah, that
Hmm.
was it.
Okay.
And in the next year, the Steeler beat opened up. The guy who was covering the Steelers went to Uniontown because that was his hometown to work at the Uniontown paper, and I took over the Steelers beat for 10 years until 2004. And then they decided they wanted the Trib was consolidating a lot of weekly or a lot of local newspapers that day. One in
Hmm.
Canning, one in Connellsville, and I was the guy who was going to consolidate these staffs and make sure they were operating smoothly. And I did that starting in 2005, for the winter of 2005, until 2009. I went to the boss and I said, "Boy, I'd like to go back to writing if I could." Because Pitt Beat was kind of opening up at that point. They weren't sure who was going to cover Pitt, so they gave me the Pitt Beat. And my first assignment was Todd Graham's initial press conference, and I'll never forget it. You remember his wife Penny, obviously, right?
Oh,
And
how could I forget?
yeah, Penny was a nice looking lady, and he stands
Among
up.
other things.
Yes, among other things. So that's what I
Among
remember
other
most
things.
about
Yeah.
it. Yeah, he blew the cover on the guy who moved the tight end, right?
Anthony Gonzalez. Yeah, she
Anthony
tweeted
Gonzalez.
about it
Yeah,
from practice. No
yeah. We
tweeting
weren't
from
supposed to write
practice.
about it, and she
Yeah.
tweeted it.
Unless you're
But
the coach's wife, no tweeting from practice.
right. So Todd stands up and introduces her, and she stands up and he goes to the crowd, "Ain't I a good recruiter?" And then AJ let me talk to him one-on-one right after that was over. And I
Uh-huh.
remember one of the first things he told me was, "People think I sound like George Bush." And he kind of did sound like a little bit like George Bush, you know.
He did. He
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
No,
So that
and then it
was
was Pitt all the way from there on. It was
yeah, and that was
14
11
years.
months of 11 months of Todd Graham, just like it was 11 months of these transfer defensive ends, I guess.
Yeah, in and out. He was ahead of his time, I guess. He was ahead
He
of his
was,
time on
yes.
it. I mean, you just said about how the Steelers had the open locker room, different kind of setup there than what you had at Pitt. I mean, what was the upside of covering Pitt versus the Steelers, and then vice versa, upside of Steelers covering versus covering Pitt from your
Well,
perspective?
the upside of covering the Steelers, was like I said, you were able to, get to know these guys a little bit more. They told you things a little bit. I'll never forget. I had a good relationship with Deuce Staley, if you remember Deuce Staley, the running
Yeah,
back.
sure.
And one day in the locker room, he was doing a scrum with a bunch of people around him, and I was over somewhere else, and I got there late. And Deuce was it was a unique guy, real, a unique kind of guy. When he wanted to stop the interview, he just stopped it. He just walked away. He didn't care if there were more questions. He just walked away. So I didn't get to ask any questions. And he noticed that I was a little disappointed because I had got there late for the scrum. So the next day, one of the PR guys comes up to me and says, "Deuce wants to see you in the cafeteria. He wants to give you an interview," and he did. And I went down and had a nice talk with him. I really enjoyed that. And
Hmm.
in the Troy Polamalu thing, I mentioned in my final column the other day, I was doing a story on religion in the NFL, and it was a subject that Troy really liked. He appreciated the topic. He was very religious, and he spent time with the monks in Greece in the off season in caves, and it was an interesting interview. And we were talking for so long that the media window closed. It was time for us to get out. And the PR guy, walks up to us and says, "Okay, guys, that's it." Troy waves him off, says, "That's okay. We can still talk."
Still talk.
That was one of the highlights of my career, actually.
Sure.
Uh, yeah, and so that's the upside of covering Steelers over Pitt. And with Pitt over the Steelers, I think if you're there long enough, which I was, and which you are too, you get to know these guys, even though we don't get to go in the locker room because they see us around all the time. And we used to crowd around them, sort of a half circle, and now they put them up in the podium. But still, we got to know these guys. Like I said, I got to know Andrew Taggart and Eddie really well. Kenny Pickett, I thought was a guy that I thought I had a good relationship with. I used to tease him all the time. Remember the one after his freshman season, he came out and he predicted we're not going to lose, we're not going to win only 5 games this year. That's my prediction.
Yeah.
And that was the year they actually went to the ACC championship game
They
that
won
year, right?
7. Yeah.
They won 7. They didn't win 5. So every year after that, I would ask, "Hey Kenny, you got a prediction for this season?" And he would just laugh, because he remembered it from the past. So
Well,
that's the thing that you still can build relationships, but it is a little bit different. But and EJ takes care of us. It's like an assembly line. He brings 3 or 4 guys through every day. Whenever the open interview time is, and we don't get to talk to people as much as we'd like to, but As a guy later in my career, Chris, I didn't care all that much anymore, especially this past spring.
Sure, sure. Yeah, you
Yeah,
got they have put us in a situation where we have to sort of make the best with what they give us. We're not like
right.
you said you had an idea and you talked to Troy Polamalu about it. Well, that's not really something that we get access to very often. No, of course, one of the great ongoing bits of your time covering Pitt certainly over the last 10 years was the injury questions of Pat Narduzzi, and I always I understand where he's coming from and all that, but I guess my question to you on a broader level, do you think at any point anything you reported ever had any even iota of impact on what happened in a game?
No,
Good or bad, positive,
no.
help win, help lose, anything you ever wrote?
Absolutely not. It really didn't matter. And Pat even told me that day I was out and they gave me the jersey that he doesn't read the papers because he introduced me actually as Jerry DiPaola to the team as Jerry DiPaola from the Post Gazette. And I corrected him. I said, no, I work for the Tribune-Review. Guys, I don't know. I don't read the stories. Remember, he showed
Yeah.
us his phone one day. He had the USA Today app. That was the only newspaper he reads, he said. So, um,
Which actually
yeah,
fits really well. The fact if the
yes.
USA Today is Pat Narduzzi's news outlet of how many every coach says that I don't read the paper. I don't read the paper. What percentage do you actually believe don't read the paper?
I think that these guys, and Narduzzi included, get stories sent to them by
Yeah.
people like EJ. If there's something that's controversial, something that he wants to know about, I think EJ is very diligent about doing things like that. But I don't think any story you or I or anybody else has written has affected the team.
Yeah.
And I truly believe that because we sit up in the press box. We don't have nothing to do with calling plays or making tackles or anything like that. If the guy drops a pass, and we had written something negative about him the week before, it's not our fault. These
Yeah.
guys are supposed to be bigger than that, and almost all of them are. But I remember when I broke the story and Duquesne hired Keith Dambrot. I got a call from the guy at the Akron Beacon Journal. Hey, Pitt Duquesne just hired Keith Dambrot from Akron. Here's his phone number. So I called him up, and he confirmed it for me. Imagine that. And if you had called up, Mike Tomlin the night before that the Steelers hired him, he would never have told you that. But Keith didn't care because he knew he had a job to do.
Yeah.
And I wrote in my last column, I says, Duquesne made the announcement the next day, and guess what? The world didn't end because he spoke too soon. Everything was fine. That's what I don't get about some of these stories. They're afraid to tell you. Not all the time. And not all the time, but most of the time, you got to go digging around. Oh, somebody just committed, or somebody resigned, or something like that. And that was a pain in the butt was doing that because it's a lot of work. Yeah, not a lot of
Yeah.
work. Not like digging ditches. I
Oh,
was outside working in the yard with my wife just now, so
yeah.
that's work.
That's work. Yeah, we're not
Yeah,
laying
right.
carpet or pouring cement or anything like that. Um, I feel like you mentioned about talking to Dambrot. Like I feel like was there something when Narduzzi first got hired? Did he make some reference to like, oh, you're the guy that's been trying to call me?
Yes.
Because you would
Mhm.
like. Do you remember what he said?
He
Something
was
along
telling
those lines.
he was telling the team that day on what day it was that last Thursday that I was calling him every day to find out if he was actually getting the pit job. And he seemed to be impressed by that I would call him day after day after day. And and he never I didn't think of it at the time. I should have said, "Why didn't you call back?" What the heck?
Just call back. It's a common
That
courtesy. It's
the
a
same
common
thing that
courtesy.
it was the same thing that Kevin Colbert told me the day he was hired because I was calling him days before he was hired. He said, "Oh, you're that guy that's calling me every day,
Yeah.
right?"
Well,
So that's what
I
that's the
wanted to,
job.
yeah, I mean, I wanted to ask you about your rapport with Pat. I mean, it's the stuff of message board legends. People have always said there should be a podcast or a buddy cop show or a road trip movie or something with you and Pat going across the country, just needling each other. But I don't know. What was your take on it sometimes? I don't want to say that it felt mean spirited at times, but a little, I thought, from my perspective, sometimes it felt a little mean spirited, that it went a little bit beyond just playful ribbing in that rapport. Were there ever times where you were like, all right, that's enough, like lay off?
Um, You know what? He might have made a comment or two at a news conference, but it wasn't like he kept jabbing, jabbing, jabbing. And it wasn't every day either. But I really think that it was playful ribbing. That's the way I took it, and then that's my I think that's my nature. I don't let things bother me too much. And yeah, I know some people might have thought that, and I tried to tell people in these past couple weeks when I've done things like this, interviews like this, that I have a lot of respect for Pat, and I think he has a lot of respect for me. I understand that he has a job to do. I have a job to do, and the injury situation. Paul Chris was the same way with me. I never forget when they won the bowl game up in Detroit, the 2013 season, I guess.
Hmm.
After he was all excited because they beat Bowling Green, and he said, "Jerry, do you want to ask me any questions about injuries?" He was in a good mood that day.
Yeah, right.
And I never thought that it was mean spirited with Pat. I never forget during COVID, uh, my wife and I were going into the Home Depot in Cranberry, and here he comes walking out with his wife and daughter, and he screamed, "Ah, Jerry, how you doing?" And we talked there for 20 minutes. Uh, so yeah, I thought I had a good relationship with Pat, and I actually, I respect it, and I cherish the times I've had with talking to him, because I haven't had many one-on-ones with him, but a couple I've had over the years, and that's one thing EJ, has done. If you wanted the one-on-one with a guy, he usually, accommodated you over the years. But I never thought it was a problem, and I never held anything against him. That's for sure.
Yeah. I've often tried to, you talk about like one-on-ones and things like that. And I've said to EJ and different people around Pitt, like, hey, it'd be good to get an interview here in June or an interview here in January. How, always, my notion is always can help drive fan interest, right? Keep the fans interested during the off season, keep them engaged with something to write about. I mean, like, how much do you think the media can kind of affect that? You know what I mean? Like, is it useful to these schools to make Pat available in February for an interview session, just to like get some stories out there, get some interest,
Right.
give people something to talk about? That's what I always say. Do you think it's legitimate? Do you think there's something
Yeah.
to that?
I agree. I think it's good, to get some off-season news. There's going to be more off-season news now, with NIL and the portal than there ever was before. So I think it's good. We talk to Pat or Jeff Capel for once a month in the off-season. Especially over the summer. It'd be nice to talk to Capel after all the transfer stuff is over. And I don't know if that's going to happen, but these the coaches usually don't want to do it. A lot of them don't want to do it. I think coaches have that mentality. They want everything to stay close together. That's why we only get to watch practice, for half an hour, even in the spring. There's no secrets out there that we're going to give away,
Yeah.
you know. But I think it's like they want outsiders around too much, and I guess that's just the way the situation is with coaches think that way, and I had no problem with it. I know. We watch practice every day. I used to watch you take copious notes every time something happened, and I said, "Wow, he's really doing a good job." Because I wasn't taking notes like that. The
Well,
way I covered the team was personalities more than who's the backup right guard.
sure. And I think you and I serve different. I mean, there's a lot of overlap in our audiences, but we serve different audiences, different types of audiences, right? I mean,
Exactly.
writing
Yeah.
for a paper or the paper website versus my site with the message boards and whatnot. You've always been a more reasonable person than me, Jerry. I tend to go extremes, good or bad. So I want you to be the moderate here. But I mean, so much talk about the future of college sports, and I'll admit that there are times when it starts feeling to me like, boy, this thing is going down the bad path and it's never going to turn around, and it's really headed toward the death and destruction that everyone's proclaiming for it. Do you like what what does it look like in 5 years? You know what I mean? What do you see a way that it veers off of the path that it appears to be on right now?
It's going to be difficult for schools like Pitt and schools like, I don't know, Syracuse, Boston College, Wake Forest to keep up with the Ohio States and the Penn States and the Alabamas, and the Oklahomas and Texas, because they got more money. Let's face it, they got a lot more money to spend. Their boosters, are millionaires, billionaires, and schools like Pitt are going to have a hard time. They're trying hard. I give Narduzzi a lot of credit for keeping Holstein, keeping Kyle Lewis, keeping Rasheem Biles, Kenny Johnson. These are four names that come to mind right away that are really going to be important to this team this year. Those are the guys he really needed. Four of the guys he really needed to keep. And then he went out and he got some other ones. Now we didn't see a whole lot from those other ones in the spring game. A lot of guys were hurt. Actually, didn't play. A lot of
Yeah.
those wide receivers. So we won't know exactly what they're going to be able to contribute until we actually see them. August the 30th against Duquesne. So. It's going to be a tough season, I think, for Pitt. I don't think they're automatically going to win 8 games. I think it's going to be difficult, to match what they did last year. They won 7, and I think they can at least match that. But I just wonder how far beyond 7 they can go. With all the competition that's out there, and they got to play Notre Dame. That's the interesting game to me. Boy, if Pitt can have a good season and go into that Notre Dame game, maybe not ranked, but maybe with only 2 or 3 losses by then. I believe it's the 10th game of the year, right?
Yeah, it's deep in the season. Yeah.
That'd be a big time game, So, I think they'll be able to get close to that, but it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough every year for Capel and for Narduzzi to put these teams together every year and to keep them together because the kid's going to go to the highest bidder. Jalen Lowe talked about how much he loved Jeff Capel and respected him and admired him and liked playing for him. Guess what? As soon as somebody waves a little money at him, he goes to Kentucky. And Kentucky goes to the NCAA tournament every year. Pitt's gone once in 9 years. So, I guess you can't blame them for doing that. The money was there. The opportunity is there, to playing bigger games. I remember T.J. McConnell. Last year he was at Duquesne. He went to the NCAA tournament and sat in the stands with his dad. And he said, I want to be part of that. I want to be part of the NCAA tournament. And he ended up transferring to Arizona and had a great career. And now he's making millions in the NBA.
Yeah.
He might still be making millions in the NBA if he stayed at Duquesne, but he wanted to go somewhere and that was before NIL. Before they could pay him for that. They paid him anyway. I don't know. But I think that you can't blame these kids for what they're doing, and it's up to the coaches to try to keep them happy and keep them around. It's not easy.
Yeah. All right. Final thing. This is a classic question for someone who's retiring. Your advice for the young sports writers out there. It's a very different world, obviously, than it was in 1972 or even in 2002 or 2012 even. This business is very different. But if a young aspiring sports writer, kid at the Pitt News or somewhere comes up to you and says, Mr. DiPaola, what should I, how should I approach this career? What would be your advice?
Well, I was talking to somebody about this, a young guy about this the other day, and I said, read as much as you can. That's one of the things I did when I was younger. I actually used to get the dictionary out every day when I was going into college from high school, and I would find 10 words and just run my finger down the page, and I'd find the word, I'd write down a definition, and I'd put it in a sentence. I did that, that whole summer. And and I read guys like Bob Smizik and Phil Music, the writers from the Pittsburgh Press that were really good, that I really respected. I did a lot of that. I read a lot of that. And, I mentioned this in my column the other day. There's 3 things that I think are important. The number one thing is respect the language. Leave the cliches out of it. Make sure your grammar is right. The language is important. You don't want to create a new language and put phrases in there that a lot of people aren't going to understand. That's one thing. The other thing is agonize over every comma, and that's why it takes me so long. I'm usually the last guy to leave the press box because I agonize over phrases, or the way I'm phrasing things. I try to do it just the right way, and agonize over the placement of every comma. And the third thing is to respect everyone whose name appears underneath your byline. And that's the most important thing, and I really try to do that. Those 3 things I would tell the young guys if they wanted to listen, but. It's not an easy business. It really isn't. And writing is difficult, Chris. And you write a lot more than I do, a lot more words than I do. But writing is like somebody described it as, slitting your wrists, let them bleed over the keyboard. That kind of
graphic.
thing.
That's
it was very graphic.
You avoided the cliches there, Jerry. You went right for the sensation. I thought you were old school, Jerry. How are you getting so sensational in your old age here?
Well, I can do it now because I'm not employed anymore.
Okay.
So this is just and I got to tell you, Chris, I'm having a time of my life talking to you today. This is great.
Well, it's funny that you use that because my metaphor is always that sometimes with certain types of articles, you just kind of throw them up. You just kind of vomit out like the 400-word piece on how the running back has to get better at blocking this year or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's it's maybe a little more. Well, I don't know if it's more colorful or less colorful than slitting your wrist, but I mean, it's, because there's only one color involved there, as opposed to if you're throwing up this column, then it's, see, this is where our conversation has gone now, Jerry. See, usually these kinds of conversations would happen in private in the press box, but now everyone gets to hear it.
Everybody gets to see them.
Everyone gets to hear it. All right. I've spent the last week trying to think of a good quote from The Godfather to signify a farewell. What's a good farewell? I was trying to think about this. You mentioned about the Pittsburgh press closing on New Year's Eve, and that I pictured being in Havana, and the Cuban Revolution on New Year's Eve. But there was no really a good quote from there. Is there a good Godfather quote that is a farewell?
How about this one? Fredo, you broke my heart. You remember that when he kissed him on the lips?
Oh yeah, in Havana on New Year's Eve.
In Havana on New Year's Eve, yeah. So I wouldn't say quitting broke my heart, but I'm gonna miss a lot of the aspects of it. Things like this today and Mondays and Thursdays with Pat, I'm gonna really miss. The games, and I enjoyed the games more than anything. The big games. We did cover some big games, ACC championship games, and the Sun Bowl was a lot of fun to cover, I thought, and. And Pitt didn't play in the Peach Bowl. Pitt didn't play a lot of those big games in my time, but the ones that they did, I think they acquitted themselves fairly well in most of them. I really thought that, they were 7-6 or 7-7 that one year, but they won some games they had to win. And, Narduzzi kept things together. Now he has to keep things together under totally different circumstances. And he knows he has a lot of work to do. And, I wish him well, and maybe I'll wave to him from the stands on November the 15th when I'm at the Notre Dame game, I hope.
Toast him with your icy light, just to you, Pat.
Crown Royal Peach is my drink.
Oh, right. Yes, I forgot. You're a hoi polloi. You're a bourgeoisie. So, you're fancier than the rest of us, Jerry. But all right. Thanks so much for your time, Jerry. All the best to you in retirement. And it was a pleasure for the last 14 years. And like I said, you walking out of the press box on Saturday, stop by anytime. We'll keep your seat open. We'll we'll just in case you ever. It's like who is it? Jerry Glanville leaving tickets for Elvis at every game. We'll keep your spot open in the press box, Jerry.
Pat told me I could go to anytime one of them to practice. I can stay and watch the whole thing. Just what I want to do in retirement. Just watch practice.
For the first time in 14 years, you're just saying, "No, sir, I don't want to go to practice."
That's right. I won't miss it.
No, thank you. All right, Jerry. Thank you so much for your time, and enjoy all this free time.
My pleasure, Chris. Thanks a lot. We'll see you down the road.
All right. Thanks to Jerry for joining us. I know that was a little bit longer, so I appreciate everybody who sat through it and listened. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was interesting to hear what Jerry had to say and get that conversation with him. I appreciate him joining us there for a little while, taking some of his time because he's got a lot of it these days. But Jerry was great. He was great to work with for 14 years. Good camaraderie, good fella to have around, good conversation. And he did the job, the way it should be done. He never made it about Jerry. It was always about the stories. And I think that's how he approached it. And I'd like to think we all try to approach it that same way. So thanks to him for hanging out today. It was a lot of fun to catch up with him. And thanks to you for watching. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. That way you don't miss any of our Pitt video content right here on YouTube. And then check out the website, Panther-Lair.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with Jerry. Hope you've had a great week. Enjoy your weekend. And I will catch up with you. We'll have a Morning Pitt on Wednesday. How about that? Right here, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.